What can you bring to heaven? My dear brothers and sisters, let me ask you a question, one that might shake you a little. What can you take with you when you die? Think about it for a moment. You've spent your whole life building something, maybe a career, a family, a reputation. You've gathered wealth, experiences, friendships. You've worked late nights, planned for the future, saved for retirement. But when that final moment comes, and trust me, it comes for all of us, what will remain? What will you bring with you beyond this life? You see, I've stood beside hospital beds, held the hands of the dying, listened to the last words of men and women who had everything, or so they thought. And do you know what no one has ever said to me in those final moments? I wish I had made more money. I wish I had owned a bigger house. I wish I had worked more hours. Not once. Instead, I hear things like, I wish I had loved more. I wish I had forgiven sooner. I wish I had prayed more, trusted God more, been a better father, a better mother, a better friend. And I wonder, if we already know what matters in the end, why do we live as if we have forever to get it right? So today, I want to talk to you about something most people don't think about until it's too late. What can you bring to heaven? I'm not talking about wealth or status. I'm talking about the things that last, the treasures that don't rust, that no thief can steal. I want to tell you about the things that will matter when you stand before God, because you will stand before Him one day. And when you do, I want you to be ready. So, listen closely, my friend, because this message, this truth, could change the way you live today. Are you ready? Let's begin. What can you bring to heaven? Part 1. The False Treasures. My dear friends, let's get one thing straight. There are things you cannot bring to heaven. And yet, these are the very things most people spend their entire lives chasing. We work. We struggle, we sacrifice, but for what? Let me take you to a funeral I attended years ago. A wealthy businessman had passed away, a man who had spent his entire life growing his empire. He had houses in 3 different countries, cars worth more than most people's homes, a bank account that never stopped growing. As I stood there, listening to people speak about his life, I noticed something. No one mentioned his money. No one talked about his businesses. No one cared about how many cars he owned. They talked about his kindness, or lack of it. They talked about his time with his family, or how little of it he gave. And it hit me. Everything he had built, everything he had worked so hard for, was left behind. Just like that. So let's talk about these false treasures. 1. Wealth, possessions, money. It's necessary in this world, isn't it? It pays the bills, puts food on the table, gives security. But do you realize that the moment your heart stops beating, every single dollar stays here? Jesus Himself warned us, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Matthew 6:19-20. What does this mean? It means money is a tool, not a treasure. It's meant to be used wisely, not worshipped. Because in the end, the size of your bank account will not matter. The size of your heart will. 2. Fame, social status. In today's world, people live for likes, for comments, for followers. We measure our worth by how many people know our name. But let me tell you something. When you stand before God, He will not ask how many people followed you. He will ask, whom did you follow? The world celebrates power, success, influence, but heaven celebrates humility, service, and love. Do you know the names of the richest men in history? Probably not. But do you know the name Mother Teresa? St. Francis of Assisi. They had nothing, and yet they are remembered forever, because in God's kingdom, the greatest are not the ones who are served, but the ones who serve. 3. Knowledge achievements. Degrees, awards, recognition, they feel important now. But what happens when life ends? Let me share a story. There was a professor, a man who had spent decades teaching at a prestigious university. He had written books, given lectures, shaped young minds, but at the end of his life, he wept. "All my knowledge," he said, "but I do not know my God." It doesn't mean learning is bad. No, learning is a gift. But wisdom is knowing what truly matters. The Bible tells us, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Proverbs 9:10. If all our knowledge does not bring us closer to God, what is it worth? So, what will you leave behind? We chase wealth. We chase status. We chase knowledge. But when death comes, they slip through our fingers like sand. So let me ask you again. What are you working for? What are you truly living for? Because there are things you can bring with you. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Part 2. The eternal gifts. Now that we know what doesn't matter in eternity, let's talk about what does. Because yes, my dear friend, there are things you can take to heaven. Things that will never fade, never rust, never be taken away. These are the treasures that last. 1. Faith. Faith is not just believing in God. It's trusting Him, walking with Him, surrendering your life to Him. Faith is what carries you through the storms. Faith is what whispers, God is still good, even when life is falling apart. When you close your eyes for the last time on this earth, faith is what will open them to eternity. Jesus Himself said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." John 11:25. You cannot bring your money to heaven, but you can bring your faith, and that is worth more than all the riches of the world. 2. Love, my dear brothers and sisters. The only thing that truly lasts forever is love. Not the kind of love the world talks about, shallow, selfish, temporary, but the love that gives, the love that sacrifices, the love that forgives. Love never fails. 1 Corinthians 13:8. Think about this. Everything you do in love echoes in eternity. Every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, it never dies. Do you know what heaven is filled with? Not gold, not jewels, love. The very presence of God, who is love. So my friend, love deeply, love boldly. Love even when it hurts, because that is the treasure that will never fade. 3. Acts of kindness, mercy. Let me tell you about a man named John. John was not a famous man. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a man who gave. He spent his life helping the poor, visiting the sick, comforting the lonely. And when he passed away, do you know what happened? Hundreds of people whose names he never even knew, came to his funeral. And they wept, not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Matthew 25:40. Every small act of kindness matters. Every moment of mercy counts. They do not disappear when you die. They go ahead of you, waiting for you in heaven. 4. Sacrifice. Nothing freely given is ever lost. Every time you give up your comfort to help someone else, every time you forgive when it's hard, every time you choose faith over fear, love over bitterness, that is a treasure stored in heaven. Jesus Himself gave us the greatest example. He sacrificed everything for us. And in that sacrifice, He won eternity. So do not be afraid to give. Do not be afraid to love. Do not be afraid to live for something greater than yourself. Because that, my dear friend, is how you prepare for heaven. What will you bring? Now you know. The world tells you to chase wealth, fame, and success, but heaven tells you to chase faith, love, kindness, and sacrifice. So, what will you bring with you? Because one day, you will stand before God. And when that moment comes, I pray you can say, Lord, I have loved, I have believed, I have given, and I have come home. What can you bring to heaven? Part 3. A priest's personal reflection. My dear brothers and sisters, allow me to step away from theology for a moment and share something personal with you. As a priest, I have seen many things. I have stood at the altar, baptizing infants, welcoming new life into the faith. I have joined the hands of young couples, blessing their love before God. But I have also stood at hospital beds, whispering prayers over those who could barely whisper back. I have held the hands of the dying, seen tears of regret, and watched as souls prepared to leave this world. These moments have changed me. They have taught me that life is shorter than we think, and eternity is longer than we can imagine. The lessons the dying taught me. Let me tell you about Maria. She was a woman of faith, strong and kind, but for many years she carried a wound, an unforgiven betrayal. As she lay in her final days, she turned to me and said, Father, I wish I had forgiven him sooner. I held on to my anger, thinking I was punishing him, but all I did was waste time. She asked for a phone, called the man she had not spoken to in years, and said 3 words, I forgive you. And then, for the first time in years, she smiled. You see, my friends, we cannot bring grudges to heaven. We cannot bring anger or hatred, but we can bring forgiveness. Then there was Thomas. A simple man, never rich, never famous. But when he died, his funeral was overflowing. People from all walks of life came, not because of his success, but because of his kindness. He was there for me when no one else was, one man said. He never had much, but he gave what he could, another added. Thomas had no great achievements in the eyes of the world. But in the eyes of heaven, he was rich, because what he gave, he kept for eternity. And then, there was a man whose name I won't say. He was powerful, successful, admired. But in his final hours, his eyes were filled with something I will never forget. Fear. Father, what if I wasted my life? He whispered. What if I spent all my years chasing things that don't matter? He had everything, except peace. And in that moment I realized, the greatest tragedy in life is not losing everything. The greatest tragedy is realizing too late that you spent your life chasing the wrong things. Part 4. The true preparation for heaven. So, my dear friend, how do we prepare? How do we live in such a way that, when our time comes, we do not fear, but rejoice? Let me tell you. 1. Live with an eternal mindset. Imagine if you knew today was your last day. Would you still hold on to that grudge? Would you still waste time chasing things that do not last? Would you still delay telling someone, I love you, or I forgive you? The truth is, we do not know when our last day will come. So why live as if we have forever? Jesus tells us, be ready, for the Son of Man will come at an hour you do not expect. Matthew 24:44. To live well means to live ready. 2. Forgive and reconcile. As I said before, you cannot bring grudges to heaven. But you can bring the relationships you've healed. If you have been hurt, let it go. If you have wronged someone, make it right. Forgiveness is not about saying, what they did was okay. Forgiveness is saying, I refuse to let this wound steal my peace any longer. And remember, when you stand before God, you will want Him to forgive you. So forgive others while you still can. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Luke 6:37. 3. Love deeply and without hesitation. Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice, an action, a sacrifice. When you love, you reflect the very heart of God. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. John 13:35. So love your family, even when they frustrate you. Love your friends, even when they fail you. Love the stranger, even when they do not love you back. Because in heaven, love is the only language spoken. 4. Pray and walk with God. Daily. My friends, prayer is not just a habit. It is your direct connection to heaven. It is not just something to do before meals or when things go wrong. Prayer is a conversation with the one who loves you more than anyone ever could. Pray without ceasing. 1 Thessalonians 5:17. A day without prayer is a day spent ignoring the one who gave you life. If you want to be ready for heaven, walk with God now. 5. Serve and give without holding back. We are not meant to live only for ourselves. Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. And if we are to follow him, we must do the same. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Matthew 25:40. Give, even when no one thanks you. Help, even when no one notices. Love, even when no one understands. Because every act of kindness is a deposit in heaven. What can you bring to heaven? Part 5. A vision of heaven. My dear brothers and sisters, let's pause for a moment. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath and imagine that today is the day. The moment has come. Your eyes grow heavy, your heart beats slower, and the world around you begins to fade. Then, silence. And suddenly, light. A light unlike anything you have ever seen. It is not harsh, not blinding, but warm, radiant, alive. You take a step forward and you realize something. Your body feels light. No pain, no weariness, no fear. And then, you see him. Standing before you is the one who created you, the one who has loved you since before time began. Jesus. His eyes meet yours, and in that single moment you understand. Every tear you ever cried, he saw. Every wound you ever carried, he felt. Every moment you thought you were alone, he was there. And then, he speaks. Not in anger, not in judgment, but in love. Welcome home. What is heaven really like? My friends, many people have different ideas of what heaven is like. Some imagine golden streets, endless singing, angels with harps. But let me tell you what heaven truly is. Heaven is not just a place. Heaven is a person. It is where God is. It is being fully, completely, eternally in his presence. No more sorrow. No more suffering, no more separation, just love. Perfect, unbreakable, infinite love. This is what we were made for. A story of a child's faith. Let me share a story. One day, a little boy asked me, "Father, will my teddy bear be in heaven?" I smiled. "Why do you ask?" "Because I love him," he said. And in that moment I realized, heaven is not about things. It is about love. What we love purely, what we cherish in goodness, what we give freely. These things do not die, because love never dies. That is why the love between a mother and her child, the love between two friends, the love we show through kindness and sacrifice, these things last forever. And yes, my dear friends, these are the things we can bring to heaven. What will you find in heaven? When you enter heaven, You will not find your money, your job title, your possessions, but you will find every prayer you ever whispered, every act of love you ever gave, every soul you helped bring closer to God, and most of all, you will find Him. You will stand in the presence of the one who knew you, loved you, and waited for you. And in that moment, every pain, every trial, every sacrifice will make sense, because you will be home. But not everyone enters. My dear friends, I must speak truthfully. Heaven is real, but so is hell. Not everyone enters heaven. Not because God rejects them, but because they have spent their lives rejecting Him. Heaven is a gift, but you must choose it, and the way you choose it is by choosing Him. Not just once, not just with words, but with your life. The invitation. My friend, you have a choice. Right now, at this very moment, you are writing the story of your eternity. Every decision you make, every word you speak, every act of love or selfishness, it all matters. So I ask you, will you live for heaven? Will you love as if eternity depends on it? Will you prepare your heart for the moment when you stand before God? Because one day, you will step into eternity, and I pray with all my heart that when you do, you will hear these words. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Matthew 25:23. And on that day, I hope to see you there. What can you bring to heaven? Conclusion. Your invitation to eternity. My dear brothers and sisters, we have traveled a long journey together today. We have spoken of the things that pass away and the things that remain. We have looked at the false treasures that deceive us and the eternal gifts that prepare us for heaven. We have imagined that sacred moment, the moment when we stand before God and He looks into our eyes. And now the question is no longer what you can bring to heaven. The question is, what will you bring? Because your life is not an accident. Your time on this earth is not meaningless. Your story is not yet finished, and you still have a choice. The final question. So, my dear friend, I ask you one last time. What will you take with you when you leave this world? Will you take the wealth that fades, the status that disappears, the grudges that weigh you down? Or will you take the love you shared, the kindness you gave, the faith that carried you through every storm? Because in the end, there is only one treasure that will matter, and that treasure is Him. The urgency of now. My dear friend, life is short. Shorter than we think. Tomorrow is not promised. Next week is not guaranteed. There is no time to wait. If you need to forgive, do it now. If you need to love more, do it now. If you need to return to God, do it now. Because when the moment comes, when you take your last breath, there will be no more second chances. And when you stand before God, the only thing that will matter is who you are before Him. The most important decision. So today, I invite you to make the most important decision of your life. Not a decision to make more money, not a decision to gain more fame. Not a decision to chase things that will pass away, but a decision to live for heaven, to live with faith, to love without fear, to give without hesitation, and to prepare your heart for the moment when you will meet the one who loves you more than you can ever imagine. A final prayer. Before we end, I want to pray with you. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Let these words sink into your heart. Heavenly Father, you have given us the gift of life, not to waste, not to chase what does not last, but to love, to serve, to prepare for eternity. Help us, Lord, to let go of what does not matter to embrace the things that will last forever. Give us faith when we are weak. Give us love when we are weary. Give us wisdom to live each day as if it were our last. And when our time comes, Lord, may we stand before you, not in fear, but with open hearts, knowing we have lived well, loved well, and prepared for heaven. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, who is our way, our truth, and our life. Amen.